Honourable Member for Aldridge-Brown Hills for securing what is a very, very important debate on support for the people of Turkey and Syria following the devastating earthquakes. And I join her in sending condolences to all those who've lost loved ones and paying tribute to all those organisations and those individuals who are working so hard to deliver aid and medical assistance on the ground. And we will need a long-term commitment to this region too. And the tragic events in Türkiye and Syria have been keenly felt in Newport East, where we have a well-established Turkish and Kurdish-Turkish communities. The Kurdish-Turkish community in Newport has grown considerably in recent years as a result of political discourse and divisions in Turkey, and a divide which has been brought into focus again over recent weeks. In Newport, a majority of families originate from provinces that have been amongst the most severely impacted by the earthquake, including Hatay, where some 21,000 deaths have been recorded, and surrounding areas of Kahramanmaraş, Gaziantep and Adıyaman, each districts with recorded death tolls of over 3,500. We know the official government death toll across central Turkey and northern Syria and southern Turkey is staggering 49,000 and is likely to rise, not least because there's still scores of destroyed buildings where search and rescue missions have not taken place. This is particularly true for the towns and villages in mountainous regions where rescue crews have been unable to access following the devastation of road and airport infrastructure. And it would be really good to hear from the Minister today what steps the international community is taking to ensure emergency support reaches survivors in those less accessible areas. And that's a question I've been asked to ask by my constituents. The scale is huge, and we're keenly aware that the world does not yet have a full picture of the devastation that's been wrought in Syria. And residents in Newport who have family members stranded in Idlib, an area which is still recovering from the barbarism wrought by Daesh, and cluster bombs from Russian and Assad-backed government forces, are particularly concerned this region should not be forgotten. Even before the earthquake, an estimated 4.1 million people in northwest Syria relied on aid to meet their basic needs. And we think there are 5.3 million survivors in Syria now dependent on humanitarian assistance. I understand there are now 3 aid routes open in Syria, and 143 convoys have been able to cross the border, but Save the Children highlight that these routes will only be open during a 3-month window, and that most of the aid packages crossing the border only have a 12-week lifespan. So a long-term strategy for aid and support is much needed, and any update on this would be much appreciated. Since the earthquake struck on February the 6th, I've been in touch with 250 constituents who've lost family or loved ones, taken part in 2 community meetings in Newport over the last fortnight, which have included heartbreaking and really harrowing accounts from those directly and indirectly affected. Last week I spoke with 2 survivors who told me they'd just managed to escape their home before the building collapsed, but were unable to save their neighbours, and they could hear their cries from under the rubble, and the cruel feeling they described of survivor guilt will never leave them, nor the horrific memories of what they heard and what they felt on that day. And I've met another constituent who lost 10 loved ones in a single building collapse, and another gentleman who'd lost 20 relatives. So there are many people worrying for their vulnerable young orphans and frail and elderly relatives who are now living under those crude tarpaulin tents. And as one constituent put it to me, if they don't die of the disaster, they will die of the cold. The water is dirty, they're hungry, and more people will die of infection and the cold than the earthquake. It's a rush for time. Sky News followed one of my constituents, Ahmet, who travelled to some of the most challenging areas in the region to try and find his only surviving relative, a 15-year-old niece. He's now stranded and can't return home to Wales as there's no one alive to care for her, which brings her on to a big ask from the community in Newport, being a kind of temporary visa system to be put in place, akin to the support being offered by other European countries like Germany, for instance, the Swiss and Dutch governments, to allow those most vulnerable individuals left stranded to reunite with family members here in the UK. I understand this might not be the government's position at the moment, but we're really grateful to hear detail from the Minister about what options might be available, what discussions he'd had with the Home Office on the handling of new visa applications, also speeding up existing visa applications. We're aware that many people, particularly the 15-year-old that I mentioned, will have lost all documentation. That's important too, and what the strategy is for orphaned children without passports or documentation. Also would echo the point made by my honourable friend about rebuilding, how you build back those buildings in a safer way for the future too. Can I also reiterate the asks that have been made by Save the Children, namely the UK government would play its part in a sustained campaign of international support to prevent further loss of life, including the secondary crisis of hunger and disease, and to ensure that the protection of children is at the centre of our action too. Can I also finish on a more optimistic note and just thank the 16 schools in Newport East who have joined forces to donate to an appeal which was collected together by Maindy Primary School, a school with a massively big heart. That these supplies were sent away last week, so a big thank you to all those donated, including Birchwood Housing, CIC, and I know there have been many appeals in Newport at the Rugby, in our local churches, for people to donate to the DEC appeal. In dark times, we tend to see the spirit of human kindness shine through brightly, and I know this is true for both my constituents and people across the country, and I know Wales and Syria stands with the people of Turkey and Syria.